And good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending upon where you are around the world. I am Marcus Holmes from the Love and Stuff community, coming live from our Love and Stuff page and via Restream. We are live on Twitch TV, on YouTube events, on the Marcus R. Holmes page on Facebook, and on LinkedIn Live. So wherever you are, whichever channel that you are watching us on, will you click share right now and tag someone to join us in yet another Black History Month moment? We're excited that we have been bringing Black History moments every day this month. That has been set aside as Black History Month. But in the words of our great colleague in the Love and Stuff community, Darren Williams, he says that Black history begins January 1st and ends December 31st every year. But these 28 days have been precious for us to share in the Love and Stuff community with you just some moments of reflection and maybe moments of information and maybe even moments of inspiration on the great heritage and legacy and history and brilliance and ingenuity of all things African American and African descent that have been contributions to this country we call the United States of America. And we continue our journey this week on looking at architecture and the arts, as we have had some phenomenal presentations which have included architects, architecture, and jazz, and the arts, and Tony Awards, and many different other things. So we have just a few more days. Sunday, we will culminate at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with a celebration that will include dramatization, oration, and music that you will not want to miss. That's Sunday evening right here on the channel that you're on right now. You can tune in and join us there. And so tonight, we continue our look. We're looking at sculptors, and two sculptors we're going to look at in particular tonight. While you click share and tag someone to join us in the discussion. I see some folks on LinkedIn. I see some folks on Facebook. I see a couple folks on YouTube events. Thank you all so much. Now, if you would be kind to click share and tag someone to join us in this wonderful opportunity of reflection, I'd appreciate it. And I'm just looking across platforms to see, are you checking in with us, telling us where you are? If you drop in the comments where you are, that would be wonderful for us to see. All right. And so we are going to go into the presentation. We're looking at two sculptors among many. We have enunciated, I think ad nauseum maybe, that there aren't enough days in February or in the year really to really enumerate the vast contributions, the varied contributions, the harrowing events that our ancestors and forefathers have faced and triumphed over and have contributed to the American culture and to the world culture at large. But in our way, we want to be able to share some of those things with you, and hopefully I will be able to pull up a few pictures of the architecture. So let's see, am I able to, I think I do have, hold on one moment, see if we got another. I think we do. Okay. All right. I'm going to bring up a picture of our first pioneer and sculpture in the arts. I'm going to bring her up in one moment. Okay. Okay, very good. All right. So our first reflection is on Mary Atmonya Lewis, also known as Wildfire. She was born July 4th, 1844, though there is an interesting set of facts around that date. She was an African American sculptor of mixed African American and Native American Ojibwe heritage. Born free in upstate New York, she worked for most of her career in Rome, Italy. She was the first African American sculptor to achieve national and then international prominence. She began to gain prominence in the United States during the Civil War At the end of the 19th century, she remained the only Black woman artist who had participated in and been recognized to any extent by the American artistic mainstream. In 2002, the scholar Molefi Kite Asante named Atmonya Lewis on his list of 100 greatest African Americans. Her work is known for incorporating themes related to Black people and indigenous peoples of the Americas into neoclassical style culture and sculpture. Atmonya repeatedly gave out misinformation about her early life. She was inconsistent even with the basic facts about her origins, presenting herself as if she thought it would help her as an Indian girl born in a wigwam, hunting, fishing, and making moccasins. The exotic product, she would say, of a childhood spent roaming the forest with her mother's people. On official documents, she gave 1842, 1844, and even 1854 as her birth year. I'm not saying that women say something different about their age. I'm just reading the facts. She played or pretended to be the noble Savage and told white lies about her upbringing. However, she was born in Albany, New York area, and most of her girlhood was apparently spent in Newark, New Jersey. By the time she got to college, she was economically privileged because her older brother had made a fortune in the California gold rush and supplied her every want, anticipating her wishes after the style and manner of a person of ample income, she said, she once wrote. Based on her own inconsistent statements, often inconsistent statements, as there is no relevant document, Atmonya Lewis was born about July 4th, 1844. Americans who did not know their birthday often said it was July 4th. She was born free in the former town of Greenbush County and Rensselaer County in New York. Her mother and Catherine Mike Lewis was mixed race, a Mississauga Ojibwe, and African American descent. She was an excellent weaver and craftswoman. Two different African American men are mentioned in different sources as being her father. The first is Samuel Lewis, who was Afro-Haitian and worked as a valet. Other sources say her father was the writer on African Americans, Robert Benjamin Lewis. Her half-brother Samuel, who is treated at some length in the history of Montana, says that their father was a West Indies Frenchman and his mother part African and partly a descendant of the educated Narragansett Indians of New York State. And Narragansett Indians are from Rhode Island and not known for education. By the time Lewis reached the age of 9, both of her parents had died. Samuel Lewis died in 1847 and Robert Benjamin Lewis in 1853. Her two maternal aunts adopted her, and her older half-brother Samuel was born in 1835 to his father of the same name and his first wife in Haiti. The family came to the United States where Samuel was a young child. Samuel became a barber at 12 after their father died. The children lived with their aunts near Niagara Falls for about 4 years. Lewis and her aunt sold Ojibwe baskets and other items such as moccasins and embroidered blouses to tourists visiting the Niagara Falls, Toronto, and Buffalo areas. During this time, Lewis went by her Native American name Wildfire, while her brother was called Sunshine. In 1852, Samuel left for San Francisco, California, leaving Lewis in the care of a Captain S.R. Mills. Samuel provided for her board and education. In 1856, Lewis enrolled in a pre-college program at New York Central College, McGrawville, a Baptist abolitionist school. At McGrawville, Lewis met many of the leading activists who would become mentors, patrons, and possible subjects for her work as her artistic career developed. In a later interview, Lewis said that she left the school after 3 years, having been declared to be wild. She writes, "Until I was 12 years old, I led this wandering life, fishing and swimming and making moccasins. I was then sent to school for 3 years, but was declared to be wild. They could do nothing with me," unquote. However, her academic record at Central College, 1856 to the fall of 1858, has been located, and her grades, conduct, and attendance were all exemplary. Her classes included Latin, French, grammar, arithmetic, drawing, composition, and declamation or public speaking. In 1959, when Atmonya Lewis was about 15 years old, her brother Samuel, an abolitionist, sent her to Oberlin, Ohio, where she attended the secondary Oberlin Academy Preparatory School for the full 3-year course. Before entering Oberlin Collegiate Institute, since 1866 Oberlin College, one of the first U.S. higher learning institutes to admit women and people of different ethnicities. The ladies' department was designed to give young ladies facilities for the thorough mental discipline and the special training which would qualify them for teaching and other duties of their sphere. She changed her name to Mary Atmonya Lewis and began to study art. Lewis boarded with Reverend John Keep and his wife from 1859 until she was forced from the college in 1863. At Oberlin, with a student population of 1,000, Lewis was one of only 30 students of color. Reverend Keep was white, a member of the Board of Trustees, an avid abolitionist, and a spokesperson for coeducation. Mary said later that she was subject to daily racism and discrimination. She and other female students were rarely given the opportunity to participate in the class or speak at public meetings. During the winter of 1862, several months after the start of the Civil War, an incident occurred between Lewis and 2 Oberlin classmates, Maria Miles and Christina Enns. The 3 women, all boarding in Keep's home, planned to go sleigh riding with some young men later that day. Before the sleighing, Lewis served her friends a drink of spiced wine. Shortly after, Miles and Enns fell severely ill. Doctors examined them and concluded that the 2 women had some sort of poison in their system, supposedly cantharides, a reputed aphrodisiac. For a time, it was not certain that they would survive. Days after it became apparent that the 2 women would recover from the incident, authorities initially took no action. That smile had creeped out because you can just imagine wildfire being called wild. And this might be one of the reasons that she might have lived out that name a bit. News of the controversial incident rapidly spread throughout Ohio. In the town of Oberlin, where the general population was not as progressive as at the college, while Lewis was walking home alone one night, she was dragged into an open field by unknown assailants, badly beaten, and left for dead. After the attack, local authorities arrested Lewis, charging her with poisoning her friends. John Mercer Langston, an Oberlin College alumnus and the first African-American lawyer in Ohio, represented Lewis during her trial. Although most witnesses spoke against her and she did not testify, Chapman moved successfully to have the charges dismissed. The contents of the victim's stomachs had not been analyzed, and there was, therefore, no evidence of poison, no corpus delicti. The remainder of Lewis's time at Oberlin was marked by isolation and prejudice. About a year after the poisoning trial, Lewis was accused of stealing artist materials from the college. She was acquitted due to the lack of evidence. Only a few months later was she charged with aiding and abetting a burglary. At this point, she had had enough and left. Another report says that she was forbidden from registering for her last term, leaving her unable to graduate. After college, Lewis moved to Boston in late 1864, where she began to pursue her career as a sculptor. She repeatedly told a story about encountering in Boston a statue of Benjamin Franklin, not knowing what it was or what to call it, but but concluding she could make a stone man herself. This cannot possibly be correct. After 2+ years at both Central College and at Oberlin, she certainly knew what a sculpture was. The Keeps wrote a letter of introduction on Lewis's behalf to abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison in Boston, as did Henry Highland Garnett. He introduced her to already established sculptors in the area, as well as writers who publicized Lewis in the abolitionist press. Finding an instructor, however, was not easy for her. 3 male sculptors refused to instruct her before she was introduced to the moderately successful sculptor, Edward Augustus Brackett. Brackett specialized in marble portrait bust. His clients were some of the most important abolitionists of the day, including Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, William Lloyd Garrison, Charles Sumner, and John Brown. To instruct her, he lent her fragments of sculptures to copy in clay, which he critiqued. Under his tutelage, she crafted her own sculpting tools and sold her first piece, a sculpture of a woman's hand, for $8. Anne Whitney, a fellow sculptor and friend of Lewis, wrote in an 1864 letter to her sister that Lewis's relationship with her instructor did not end amicably, but did not disclose the reason for the split. Lewis opened her studio to the public in her first solo exhibition in 1864. Lewis was inspired by the lives of abolitionist and Civil War heroes. Her subjects in 1863 and 1864 included some of the most famous abolitionists of her day, John Brown and Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. When she met Union Colonel Shaw, the commander of an African-American Civil War regiment from Massachusetts, she was inspired to create a bust of his likeness, which impressed the Shaw family, who purchased her homage. Lewis then made plaster cast reproductions of the bust. She sold 100 at $15 apiece. This was the most famous work to date, and the money she earned from the bust allowed her to eventually move to Rome. Anna Quincy Waterston, a poet, then wrote a poem about both Lewis and Shaw. From 1864 to 1871, Lewis was written about or interviewed by Lydia Maria Child, Elizabeth Peabody, Anna Quincy Waterston, and Laura Curtis Bullard, all important women in Boston and New York abolitionist circles. Because of these women, articles about Lewis appeared in important abolitionist journals, including Broken Fetter, the Christian Register, and the Independent, as well as many others. Lewis was aware of her reception in Boston. She was not opposed to the coverage she received in the abolitionist press, and she was not known to turn down monetary aid, but she could not tolerate the false praise. She knew that some did not really appreciate her art, but saw her as an opportunity to express and show their support for human rights. Early works that proved highly popular included medallion portraits of the abolitionist John Brown, described as her hero, and William Lloyd Garrison. Lewis also drew inspiration from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and his work, particularly his epic poem, The Song of Hiawatha. She made several busts of its leading characters, which drew from Ojibwe legend. While in Rome, Lewis adopted the neoclassical style of sculpture as well as in the bust, as seen in the bust of Dr. Dio Lewis. She writes, quote, "I was practically driven to Rome in order to obtain the opportunities for art culture and to find a social atmosphere where I was not constantly reminded of my color. The land of liberty had no room for a colored sculptor," unquote. The success and popularity of these works in Boston allowed Lewis to bear the cost of the trip to Rome in 1866. On her 1865 passport is written, "M. Atmonya Lewis is a Black girl sent by subscription to Italy, having displayed great talents as a sculptor." The established sculptor Hiram Powers gave her space to work in his studio. She entered a circle of expatriate artists and established her own space within the former studio of the 18th century Italian sculptor Antonio Canova. She received professional support from both Charlotte Cushman, a Boston actress and a pivotal figure for expatriate sculptors in Rome, and Maria Weston Chapman, a dedicated worker for the anti-slavery cause. Lewis spent most of her adult career in Rome, where Italy's less pronounced racism allowed increased opportunity to a Black artist. There, Lewis enjoyed more social, spiritual, and artistic freedom than what she had held in the United States. Being a Catholic, her experience in Rome also allowed her both spiritual and physical closeness to her faith. In America, Lewis would have had to continue relying on abolitionist patronage, but Italy allowed her to make her own in the international art world. She began sculpting in marble, working with the neoclassical manner, but focusing on naturalism within themes and images relating to Black and American Indian people. The surrounding of the classical world greatly inspired her and influenced her work, in which she recreated the classical art style, such as presenting people in her sculptures as draped in robes rather than in contemporary clothing. Lewis never married and had no known children. According to her biographer, Dr. Marilyn Richardson, there is no definite information about her romantic involvement with anyone, male or female. However, in 1873, her engagement was announced, and in 1875, still engaged, his skin color was revealed to be the same as hers, although his name is not given. There is no further reference to this engagement, which could well be another one of Lewis's white lies. Samuel Lewis, her half-brother, became a barber in San Francisco, eventually moving to mining camps in Idaho and Montana. In 1868, he settled in the city of Bozeman, Montana, where he set up a barbershop on Main Street. He prospered, eventually investing in commercial real estate and subsequently building his own home, which still stands at 308 South Bozeman Avenue. In 1999, the Samuel Lewis House was placed on the National Register of Historical Places. In 1884, he married Mrs. Melissa Rayleigh Bruce, a widow with 6 children. The couple had one son, Samuel E. Lewis, 1886 to 1914, who married but died childless. The elder Lewis died after a short illness in 1896 and is buried in Sunset Hill Cemetery in Bozeman. The mayor of Bozeman was a pallbearer. Lewis' grave is in St. Mary's Roman Catholic Cemetery in London. She lived in the Hammersmith area of London, England, before her death on September 17, 1907, in the Hammersmith Borough Infirmary. According to her death certificate, the cause of her death was chronic Bright's disease. She is buried in St. Mary's Roman Catholic Cemetery. There were earlier theories that Lewis died in Rome in 1907, or alternatively that she had died in Marin County, California, and was buried in an unmarked grave in San Francisco. So I want to show you her picture and then one of her sculptures. And this is a picture of Mary Atmonya Lewis. And then I will show you one of the sculptures. Okay. This is the sculpture that she did of Dr. Dio in Rome. I'm hoping that you're seeing that okay. Yes, you are. And this is the sculpture that's called Hiawatha, named after the work that she was so enthralled with. And briefly, I will share with you a little bit of one more Black sculptor who is hailed as the most important Black woman sculptor of the 20th century, and who it is said that unfortunately, little of her work still survives today. Augusta Savage started sculpting as a child in the 1900s, using what she could get her hands on. The clay that was part of the natural landscape in her hometown of Green Cove Springs, Florida. Eventually, her talents took her far from the clay pits of the South. She joined the burgeoning art scene of the Harlem Renaissance, where her talents led her to New York. Her work was lauded, and she was consistently admired by contemporary Black artists, but her renown was transient, and much of her work has been lost since she could mostly afford to cast only in plaster. Like other key figures of the 1920s, such as Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, Savage skillfully challenged negative images and stereotypical depictions of Black people. One of her largest commissions, for instance, were sculptures for the World's Fair of 1939, inspired by Lift Every Voice and Sing, a song often described as the Black national anthem. The harp, another work in the commission, depicted Black singers as the ascending strings of the instrument. Regrettably, both pieces were destroyed when the fairgrounds were torn down. I think we'll try to show you that photo as well. I think it is a good depiction of her work. Born in 1892, Savage would often sculpt clay into small figures, much to the chagrin of her father, a minister who believed that artistic expression was sinful. In 1921, she moved to Harlem, where she enrolled at the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art. A gifted student, Savage completed the 4-year program in only 3 and quickly embarked on a career in sculpting. During the early to mid 1920s, she was commissioned to create several sculptures, including a bust of National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP leader W.E.B. Du Bois, and charismatically Black nationalist leader Marcus Garvey, 2 key Black leaders of the period who were often at odds with each other. Both pieces were well received, especially in Black circles, but the racial climate at the time hampered wider recognition of her work. Savage won a prestigious scholarship at a summer arts program at the Fontainebleau School of the Fine Arts outside of Paris in 1923, for instance, but the offer was withdrawn when the school discovered that she was Black. Despite her efforts, she filed a complaint with the Ethical Culture Committee, and public outcry from several well-known Black leaders at the time, the organizers upheld the decision. 2 years after being rejected from the summer arts program at Fontainebleau, she received a scholarship to study at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Rome, Italy. Unable to raise the funds for travel and living expenses, Savage chose not to accept it. Yet, in some ways, the scholarship itself functioned as validation for her work and evidence of her increasing global visibility and influence in the profession. In 1929, though Savage did get to Paris as part of a prestigious fellowship she won for one of her famous pieces, Gammon, a life-size bust depicting a young Black boy. The sculpture graced the cover of Opportunity, the official magazine of the National Urban League. While in Paris, Savage exhibited her work at several galleries and collaborated with other Black men and women residing there, including poets Claude McKay and Countee Cullen and fellow sculptor Nancy Elizabeth Prophet. Her sculptures caught the attention of Martinian writer Paulette Nardal, who later included a picture of Gaiman in a 1930 article on Savage's life and work. Describing Savage as a self-made woman, Nardal went on to highlight Savage's extraordinary talent as a sculptor, as well as her commitment to mentoring young Black artists. When she returned to Harlem in the early 1930s, Savage focused on teaching and founded her own art school in Harlem, Savage Studios of Arts and Crafts. Years later, she opened a gallery, providing a space, though short-lived, to feature the works of Black artists from across the country and the globe. When she passed away in 1962, she was remembered by many as a gifted sculptor and passionate activist who stood up in the face of injustice. Much like her predecessor, Atmonya Lewis, the 19th century African-American sculptor who we discussed earlier, Savage used the craft of sculpting as a vehicle for challenging racial discrimination. The Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture did stage an exhibit featuring 19 of her pieces in 1988, but few of her sculptures remain. Even so, Savage remains arguably the most influential Black woman sculptor of the 20th century. Her efforts, no doubt, helped to pave the way for many Black women sculptors to follow. And I'd like to just share a few, just one of her pieces and a portrait of her. So this is one of her pieces. Let's see, I don't know if it opened for us. Let's see. Okay, did not. Show you a piece of her. Okay. Right, we're going to show her photo. I'm going to try to pull up the sculpture of, this is the sculpture, one of her sculpture pieces. I want to show you the piece of the sculpture with the angels. That's called the harp that was done. Right. Okay. All right, let's see. Okay, there we go. Thank you for your patience in that. All right, I think we'll be able to pull that up. Yes. And this piece is called the harp. What a beautifully done piece with Black people as the strings of the harp. And as was mentioned, most of her work did not survive because she did not have the resources to do it outside of doing it in plaster. So many of her works were destroyed and dismantled when the exhibit halls or galleries that held those pieces were closed or torn down. That's our Black History Month moment for today. I am so excited to share these two African-American women. I'm not sure whether you've heard of them before, but it's good to again see that people use their art and their platform to make a difference and to stand in a time of racial injustice and discrimination, not unlike today. And so what trailblazers these two women were in the field of sculptor. When you think of sculptor, I don't know if you think of African American or persons of color, indigenous people, but here are just two examples of many of we have extraordinary gifting and talent and brilliance along the spectrum of the African American diaspora, and much to be proud of. Though many of their works did not survive, their legacy and rich heritage and trailblazing pathway moves forward. Join us tomorrow at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will continue our look at architecture and the arts. We're going to look at some of the buildings that still stand today that have great meaning within the African American culture. Join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. Click follow on the Love and Stuff page on Facebook and be notified of all events that are happening. And also join us Sunday for the culmination of these 28 days of Black History Month moments at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right from where you're watching right now. If you're watching in the car, if you're watching getting your nails done, if you are watching from home in the comfort of your home, or maybe you're at work, wherever you are in that same spot, just turn to the same channel on Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. There will be works of oration, works of dramatization, music, and some film. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be a great closing to our month-long celebration, and we hope that you will join us there.